Dunkirk.
You can practically see it from here.
What?
Home.
Dunkirk tells the story of the Dunkirk evacuation, which apparently is a well-known historical event in the UK and Europe, and I'm sorry to say that I either never learned about it in US schools, or I did and then forgot. Impossible to say which. After Germany invaded France in May of 1940, they surrounded and cornered 400,000 British and French troops on the beaches of Dunkirk in northern France, creating what Winston Churchill called a colossal military disaster. The subsequent rescue of those cornered soldiers, as dramatized by the movie, is considered one of the most important military operations of World War II, and therefore one of the most important military operations of the 20th century. Appropriately, the movie opens with our main character, I guess, being chased out of the streets of Dunkirk by gunfire from unseen Germans, and retreating to the beaches of Dunkirk. It's a really simple but really smart bit of exposition. Nolan takes the whole historical setup for the movie, British and French soldiers cornered by Germans on a French beach, and then opens with literally that happening to one British soldier as a microcosm for the situation at large. He even passes by a French barricade between the streets and the beach to establish that the French are holding the line to protect the retreating soldiers. But they won't be able to hold the line forever, and the Germans are closing in. To make matters worse, on the beach they're sitting ducks for German bombers, and the British Royal Air Force is being reserved for the Battle of Britain, which would take place 2 months later and be fought entirely with air forces. So no one is available to come protect them from the bombers, save for a small team, led by a pilot named Farrier, played by Tom Hardy. So there are 400,000 troops that need to get home. And to you geography buffs out there, that means they need to cross the English Channel. The waters were too shallow at Dunkirk to load troops onto large destroyers, so they had to do it one ship at a time on these kilometer-long piers called moles, which is extremely slow going. And all the while, bombers. In order to get as many soldiers home as possible, and I phrase it that way because it doesn't seem like they were confident it would work, the British Navy commandeers small private boats to take across the channel. And some boat owners, like Mr. Dawson, played by Mark Rylance, take their boats to Dunkirk themselves, thank you very much.
There's no hiding from this, son. We have a job to do.
By the way, all of that happened, but this movie has fictional characters not based on anyone. In fact, Nolan named the eyebrows and jawline on the beach Tommy, after the slang term for a common soldier in the British Army, the equivalent of an American soldier being named Joe, as in GI. And I know his name is Tommy because I read the Wikipedia page, but his name is never actually said out loud, as far as I could notice. He's meant to be an anonymous stand-in for any British soldier. We don't really hear his name because he could be anybody, which also kind of makes him everybody. So we root for him and want him to make it home because he's our brother, son, husband, cousin, neighbor. And even though we know Mr. Dawson and Farrier's names, and a few others, the characters are mostly anonymous. Cillian Murphy's character remains unnamed entirely, even on the Wikipedia page. There aren't really character arcs. The situation is the star. And that has its advantages and disadvantages. For example, the anonymousness of the deaths, of which there are plenty, is cold, detached, impersonal, and, I think, chilling and effective. There's a great depth of frame shot as German bombs drop and everyone hits the deck, and Tommy's in the foreground and there are dozens of cowering soldiers in the background. And just every few feet, a bomb drops and a few of them blow up. Impersonal, detached, chilling. And this of course feeds right into the idea of Tommy being a stand-in for any soldier. He's not safe from danger as the protagonist, because he's just as anonymous as the people being blown up in the background behind him. The only thing special about him is that the camera happens to be following him. On the other hand, the anonymousness of the deaths makes them anonymous. So when characters die, we don't really feel it as much as we otherwise might have had there been even a little bit of character development and personal investment. I realize it's a bit ironic, but I actually felt more for these deaths than I did for a character that we'd been following for most of the movie. Spoilers, some of them don't make it. The lack of character development is both by design, probably, and also mostly resulting from a lack of another thing that most scripts have. Dialogue. There's not no dialogue, but there's not much. And I actually dig that, for a number of reasons. First of all, it makes for some really nice quiet moments to contrast the big loud moments that you know are coming. Second, Nolan's kind of getting out of his own way. This is a guy whose movies have always had amazing structure and ingenious plotting, sometimes building to a twist of sorts. But the dialogue, Look, I'm not saying it's bad. It's usually fine. But we all know everyone's least favorite parts of Interstellar, and I've said enough times now that this character only exists to receive exposition. Here, I've already complimented his exposition in the opening scene. And then he smartly rips off the band-aid with the rest of the exposition using this commander and colonel pair, who Nolan refers to as the Greek chorus of the movie. And he otherwise just does away with dialogue. Little more than the minimum needed. And speaking of his movies having incredible structure and Nolan leaning into his strengths, Dunkirk has some structural maneuvering. The story is split between the Mole, the Dawson's Boat, and the Royal Air Force, which is great. The dogfighting sequences are jaw-dropping, the civilians involved in the evacuation show the far-reaching effects of the war, and the Mole scenes show how difficult it was to get off this damn beach, what with the dive bombers and torpedoes. And it all shows how much was involved in the evacuation, while still capturing the direness. And probably one of the only ways it was possible to tell all three of these interconnected stories and still do the stories justice was to use time dilation. The Mole scenes take place over the course of a week, which helps give a sense of how long the evacuation actually took. It took 10 days in real life, and helps do justice to how much the soldiers try and fail to get home. The boat scenes take place over the course of a day, as it lasts about the length of a boat trip across the channel. The flying scenes take place over the course of an hour, or about how much flight time their fuel tanks allowed. Now, I wouldn't go so far as to call this an incredible structure, particularly by Nolan standards, but it's certainly a creative solution to make the movie work. And it works. Those timescales are announced via title card at the start of the movie, as each storyline is introduced. And that implicitly creates a ticking clock. I mean, we see 3 planes fly past us, and then we see a title card fade up that says, air, 1 hour. And instantly you're like, oh, I wonder what's going to happen in an hour. With the boat, it's like, I wonder what's going to happen at the end of this day. I wonder what's going to happen at the end of this week. It's a promised conclusion. It's a ticking clock because you know something's going to go off. And wouldn't you know it, Hans Zimmer included a clock ticking in the score, which, fun fact, is actually the ticking of Christopher Nolan's personal pocket watch that Hans Zimmer recorded and synthesized. Outside of the structural time dilation, it's a pretty simple script, mostly just built around action set pieces. Nolan apparently wanted to shoot without a script originally, which is probably why we ended up with so little dialogue. The time dilation and overlapping storylines allow for a little bit of dramatic irony, like when we meet a character in one storyline whom we've already met in a different storyline further in the future, or we'll see a plane crash from one perspective, and then 20 minutes later see the same plane crash from another perspective. But honestly, the storylines don't interact as much as I would have hoped. And when they do finally converge, they do so in ways that you mostly expect. I kept waiting for the movie to reveal some grand secret that had been hiding in plain sight, as Nolan is sometimes wont to do, waiting for some grand unifying moment. But it never really came. As much as I like the movie overall, the lack of character development and the lack of surprises made it a little forgettable for me. Dunkirk is the unique Oscar movie that's been out since the summer. The reason studios put their Oscar movies in the fall and winter is so that the movies are still fresh in people's minds when nominations and voting takes place. So the fact that Dunkirk walked away with a Best Picture and Best Director nomination, along with 6 others, is in itself indicative of Dunkirk's staying power. Or it's indicative of Warner Brothers' For Your Consideration campaign. One of the two. So maybe I'm in the minority, but since seeing the movie in July, I remembered close to none of it come January, and I had to rewatch it twice to write this. Still, Dunkirk is a really good movie. For its action set pieces, for its structure, for its cinematography, for its performances, and for all the things that make it unique. We never cut to a waiting girlfriend or wife or mother on the home front. We never cut to Churchill. We never even see Germans. We see their planes during the dogfights, but Nolan never mounted a camera onto any of the German planes like he did for the Royal Air Force. We literally never see from the Germans' perspective. And how about this? Dunkirk doesn't feature any Americans. Apparently Christopher Nolan was first inspired to do a Dunkirk movie decades ago, but he knew he had to wait until he'd gained his studio's trust, because he figured a huge budget war movie without a single American soldier would be a tough sell. One genre redefining Batman trilogy and a mind-melding trilogy later, here we are. At $100 million, this has to be one of the most expensive war movies with 0 American soldiers ever made, right? And I'm guessing it's probably one of the first war movies with 0 American soldiers to gross $188 million in America. Somebody look that up. Alexa! And Dunkirk is definitely a great war movie, because it gets to the heart of what so many war movies have in common. Getting home. Surviving. That's an undercurrent in just about every war movie, with exception. And Dunkirk takes the undercurrent and makes it the whole movie. Trim the fat from a Christopher Nolan epic and trim the cliches from a war epic, and you're left with Dunkirk. A tight hour and 40 minutes of just the good parts.
Where's the bloody Air Force?